Today's the third and last day of the Social Vision conferences. We have a great series of panels today. This first one's going to start in just a few minutes, which I'll introduce then, but we have one at 12:15, 1, and 2, which are going to be great. So please join us later today as well. I'm just going to really quickly play around with this Facebook I like sharing it to my friends so that they can watch. And please, if anyone wants to extend this to their friends and family, we encourage that. But we'll get started in mere moments. There, share. All right. It's hard to set up your screen so that it looks real. You can see everything you want to see. All right. So we have some intent. Okay, let's get started. So, yeah. Okay, now we're officially starting now. Welcome to the Social Vision Conferences. This is the Religion as Therapeutic to the Modern World panel. I'm going to moderate. My name is Jonah Gelfand. And we have 3 really awesome panelists today. I'm particularly excited for this panel. So I'll just introduce everyone and they'll talk, and then we'll have some conversation at the end. So first is Dr. Rachel Werczberger. Werczberger, thank you. And she's a professor at the Schechter Institute of Jewish Studies, and her remarks will focus on the link between Jewish spirituality and therapy.
Okay. So, hi. Good morning to those of you who are in the morning zone of the planet, and good afternoon or evening to those of us here on the other side of the ball. Thank you, Philip, and thank you everyone for the invitation and for the opportunity to talk in this very interesting and exciting event. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an anthropologist of religion. I'm especially interested in the transformation of religion and specifically of Judaism in contemporary era. And specifically, even more specifically, I'm interested in Jewish spirituality, or the turn towards Jewish spirituality. And by saying Jewish spirituality, I use this term broadly as to encompass various groups and individuals and phenomena which is currently taking place both in Israel and in North America. And lately, I've been starting to think about these issues also through the notion of everyday religion. So this perspective of everyday religion attends to religious practices and experiences of social actors. So the focus here is on more on practice and things we do and the way we understand things we do than on classical institutional framework or textual framework. And through these practices, individuals produce, encounter, and share their shared experience. So I really think that if we want to understand why are people drawn to religion in general, or to Judaism, or to Hasidism, we need to take note of their feelings, their embodied perceptions, their uncertainties, and the desires as they move through their life. And just to begin with a small personal anecdote, I've been thinking about these things about last evening, yesterday, while I was listening to one of the conference's panels. So, as all of you are probably aware of, there are some of the advantages or disadvantages of this pandemic. Is the fact that we can actually sit back at home and participate in conferences, sitting comfortably on our couch, sipping some coffee. So here I was sitting in our living room, listening to all these distinguished scholars discussing, deep theological points about the Rabbi Lubavitcher's theology. And in the background, the television was open. So I would not recommend this. Don't try to participate in a conference and listen while TV is open, but this is what happens, one of the hazards. And incidentally, the TV was open on a new Israeli documentary TV series about the Rabbi Nachman of Breslov and his Hasidim. The series is called Rabbeinu. Which is, for anyone who's recently been to Israel, there's no way you cannot be aware of this great hype around Breslov Hasidim and different streams in Breslov Hasidim. And there's so many groups and individuals who are now engaged with this Hasidut. We see them dancing in the streets. We see loads and quantities of balei tshuva that our Hasidut is drawing to it, including some very high profiles, artists and performers like Shuli Rand and some other people. And of course, the pilgrimage, a mass pilgrimage to Uman, to Rabbi Nachman's gravesite, which draws every year tens of thousands of Hasidim. And I'm using the term Hasidim, which is, and I use it very broadly, because if you look at the people who go to this pilgrimage are not your regular ultra-Orthodox Breslov Hasidim, but are people from all walks of life, including some who would even define themselves as secular, some would be national religious, and some would be Mizrahi from Eastern origin. And especially now with the pandemic, with the COVID-19 thing, there's like this big issue of now, will this pilgrimage take place this year or not? There's lots of discussion, a lot of political pressure. But that's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is that while we can discuss theology, we can discuss text, we can discuss really important points to be discussed, and Breslov scholars do that all the time, we need also to look at the life of people who are involved in this forms of, in this religious and spiritual forms. And so one of the questions which the series does in a way ask, but doesn't really answer, or answers but only partially, is why are people drawn to Breslov Hasidim? And without doing, deep research on Breslov, because that's not my field, my hunch is that people are drawn to Breslov as much as they're also drawn to other forms of Jewish spirituality, both Orthodox and non-Orthodox, because these configurations attend or focus on the psychological needs of individuals, on his emotional needs, his whole mental, emotional world. Or in other words, all these religious thought systems act sometimes intentionally and sometimes only hermeneutically by the people involved in them as forms of religious therapy. So while some may argue, and I think this has been argued here in this conference, is that people are drawn to Breslov or to Chabad because of the inner worldly mysticism they offer, I believe that this attraction is also based on elements of self-reflection they offer, or put differently, mysticism turned psychology. So what I'm trying to figure out is what's happening in contemporary Jewish life. How did Rabbi Nachman become an acclaimed therapist for his Hasidim? Why is it that we find today coaching techniques based on Chabad teaching, or workshops for self-development based on Rabbi Nachman's teaching, or non-Orthodox Jewish spirituality forms such as positive Judaism? All these things are going around, and again, I'm talking about Jewish spirituality in this very broad terms. So based on my readings of relevant pages in Philip's book, and also my acquaintance with this field, I'd like to offer here some thoughts on the current cultural makeup that turned religion into a form of therapy. And also, I would like to contextualize these processes within late capitalism and neoliberalism. At the end of my talk, I'll also note the uniqueness and what I think is the uniqueness of the case of Jewish spirituality as compared to more or at least to non-Jewish spirituality, in terms of the dialectic between self and community, and also realign myself or return to the Rebbe's thinking on these issues. So a word about the origins of this phenomena. The amalgamation of religion and therapy has peaked in late modernity. Yet its origins are definitely in the conceptions of selfhood, the self-cultivated in modernity. In modernity, as scholars such as philosophers such as Charles Taylor have argued, the self has become to be understood as based on inner authentic core, covered by layers of conformity to social norms. One's mission is therefore to turn inward and to reflect and reveal his real authentic essence, and after revealing it, to realize it. According to Tyler, being a full person in this day and age is linked to the imperative of listening to one's self and following one's unique path, both of which are to be individually discovered. The modern ideas of expressivity, personal creativity, and genuineness, argues Tyler, are part and parcel of this generation's intensive search for authenticity. These elements are perceived as run counter and even undermining established social norms. And there enters therapy. The ethos of this ethos of authenticity is buttressed by the expansion of another modern construct, the therapeutic culture. The extraordinary success of psychoanalysis and therapeutic may be explained by the way in which it, and here I'm quoting Eva Illouz, seamlessly combines and in this way reconciles two central and contradictory aspects of modern selfhood. First, the self was now turned inward in search of its authenticity and unique individuality. Second, the self was summoned by the culture and institutions of modernity to be rational. Following Freud, therapy became the privileged site for the expression of the inner self, as well as a site that encouraged introspection, a focus on feelings, and most of all, a search for a lost and true self. Accordingly, an emotionally healthy individual must be free of external moral authority and must resist pressure to hold off personal urges for the sake of ostensibly higher cause. The triumph of the therapeutic, or the secular therapeutic, is often said to come at the expense of religious. Yet much of the Western religion now incorporates a therapeutic ideology. Many American Protestants, as Tanya Luhrmann shows, now define God more like a counselor who responds to individual needs and feelings than a judge who condemns sinners and blesses the faithful. This is also true for many of Rabbi Nachman's Hasidim, who referred to God as Tate, father, daddy in Yiddish. Moreover, various religious modalities incorporate the language of therapy, emphasizing the ways in which religious adherence serves one's spiritual development and enhances well-being. So if you just Google religion and well-being, you'd find loads and loads of entries on, and it could come both from Christian groups and Jewish groups and spiritual, non-religious groups. It's part of being religious. So some scholars, and now I go back to the origins, while some scholars have noted the merging of religion with ethic self-realization is well-rooted in American cultural and religious traditions, such as transcendentalism, expressive romanticism, and Methodism. Yet it is under late capitalism and neoliberalism that the spiritual, the therapeutic, and the neoliberal have merged. This synthesis is clearly evident in contemporary spiritualities, which have become increasingly popular during the past few decades. Contemporary spiritualities are conceived here as a form of deinstitutionalized or do-it-yourself religion, which draws on multiple traditions, styles, and ideas, and packaging certain ideas such as growth, self-realization, self-discipline, happiness, achievement, purpose, freedom, harmony as spiritual commodities. Importantly, these ideals are also closely related to the therapeutic discourse and reflect a growing cultural and personal concern with self-reflexivity and the formation of the self according to neoliberal ideals such as choice, resilience, autonomy, and well-being. By shifting the psychological focus to the realization of the self, these new forms of spirituality, or post-psychoanalytic therapies, fuse the religious with the therapeutic. Many forms of contemporary spiritualities use the therapeutic language in order to emphasize that spiritual development is attained through self-improvement, autonomy, and accountability. These trends are also visible in contemporary modes of Jewish spirituality. For instance, Mira Nicolasco's study on the new Jewish spirituality market in North America, reveals that the appropriation of Eastern spiritualities and the creation of Jewish spiritual hybrids is often driven by a consumeristic logic and the need to repackage, rebrand, and market Judaism in order to attract unaffiliated Jewish youth. My own study on Jewish spirituality in North America under neoliberalism showed how these forms of Jewish spirituality, among them Jewish mindfulness, these are the forms I sort of try to focus on. Jewish mindfulness, the Neo-Mussar movement, and positive Judaism. So these forms merge the spiritual, the therapeutic, and neoliberal discourse, and in doing so, cultivate a distinct Jewish form of neoliberal spiritual subjectivity. Importantly, unlike their predecessors, I tried practicing the word so many times, you remember it. The Jewish spirituality, so unlike their predecessors, sounds like a type of dinosaur, the Jewish spirituality of the counter-Judaism of the 70s and 80s and that of the Jewish renewal movement that interweaved the search for spiritual experience with the attempt to renew Jewish tradition and to socially and politically transform the world. These forms, the one I'm talking about, of Jewish spirituality, shift the idea of transformation to the self. So we're not focusing, so these forms, if they're all the forms of Jewish spirituality, focus on the self, but at the same time, to also focus on the world and on the renewal of the tradition and on transforming, politically transformation of the world. The forms that I discuss now are really, really focused on the self, its psychological experiences and its therapeutic needs. And yet, and this is where my thinking on these issues begins to align with Schneerson, with Rabbi Schneerson, what comes up very strongly in my research is that Jewish spirituality is also a little bit different than the regular neoliberal spirituality self. Because this is a Jewish spirituality that cultivates a distinct Jewish self, one which is deeply embodied in the community. The three forms of Jewish spirituality I studied have not entirely repudiated the connection of the Jewish self to the community. In fact, all three expand the idea of transformation to include in one way or another the community. They understand the Jewish community as a site in which subjectivity is constantly questioned, articulated, and communally constructed anew. Put differently, Jewish spirituality, like similar neoliberal spiritual modalities, conceive the Jewish self in terms of an autonomous, self-regulating subject, which takes personal responsibility for its own functioning, embraces neoliberal ideals such as entrepreneurship and effectivity, and strives for well-being and happiness. At the same time, this self remains deeply committed to its identity as a Jew and to its community. This tendency should come as no surprise when considering Judaism's unique configuration of the relation between the cultural poles of the individual and the community. And now I'm referring to Pearl Folds' work on this issue. According to Pearl Folds, in Jewish life, the distinction between private and public and the self and community is not one of conflict, but of complementarity. Finding the balance, she argues, between them is a quintessential experience of the Jew. Indeed, ethnographic findings have revealed that among American liberal Jews, the privatized, individualized search for meaning of individual Jews often merges with the collectivist social dimension of Jewish life. Individual expressions of agency are often rooted in communal and historical contexts and textual traditions. It is thus possible to speculate that the engagement with Jewish spirituality affords its adherents a way of cultivating neoliberal subjectivity while remaining involved with the broader Jewish community and their own Jewish identity. This conclusion brings me back to Philip's book and to the Lubavitcher Rebbe's thinking on the dialectic between the self and community, undoing the common wisdom that individual, common and scholarly, a wisdom that individual flourishing and collectivism stand in competition to each other. In the Rebbe's thinking, the individual and the collective are complementary to one another. The collective can only be sustained when individuals thrive, and individuals can be best excel when the collective is well provided for. At the same time, the Rebbe recognized the danger of more navel-gazing as a remedy for inner psychological disturbances. Instead, he suggested to young men who wrote to him to replace self-concern with a concern for others. And here I quote from his letter: "You must get away from yourself and to begin to think of other. In other words, the way to cope with emotionally charged situation is to stop trying to cope with it and engage with society." Not exactly what your therapist would recommend for you, I imagine. Personally, this advice struck a note in me. I suddenly remembered what my mother told me about my grandmother's way of coping after my grandfather's death. My grandmother was a stout lady of Yeke, or German descent, not your type for any sort of navel-gazing or self-pity. So her way of getting back into the world, which for a grieving person means literally being able to get up in the morning, was to decide that every day she will do two things, one for herself and one for somebody else. This, I feel, is also the formula suggested by the Rebbe. One should live for himself and aspire to thrive and flourish. And at the same time, remember that while for me the whole world was created, it is also our responsibility and duty to take responsibility over this world, both in terms of environment and also in terms of the people who live in it. This indeed is one formula I'm happy to adopt. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating. Our next speaker is Michal Etzion, who's a PhD student at the program of Gender Studies at Bar Ilan University. And I will unmute you, and I will mute you. Please take it away, Michal. Oh, sorry, you're still muted.
Okay, thank you very much. As Jonah told you, my PhD deals with women agency and missionary living, the experience of Chabad Shlichot. So first, I would like to thank Philip and Ellie and Michael for a wonderful book and the conference invitation. And I also want to thank Jonah for the emails and for the technician support of Denise. Social Vision book helps me very much with my research and meet it in so many points, as I'll show you further. I would like to start with a short story that astonished the Chabad community and even Jewish around the world last April. Sterner Wolf, Hanover Shlicha, the emissaries decided to remain living in Hanover even after the tragic passing of her husband, Rebbe Benny Wolf. The couple arrived to North Germany in 2005 and established the Chabad Jewish Center, serving people for all walks of life. As common of Shlichot life, the couple works as a team. Her decision was to have Rabbi Wolf buried at local Jewish ceremony. You know, it was the first Chabad Hasidic who buried in Germany land since the Holocaust. And to expand her role as full-time director of Chabad in Hanover. Sterner Wolf said, I live here only when the Mashiach comes. She is the only woman in the world who stands completely alone in the head of Chabad house. This description, quite extreme, but it describes the exceptional situation of emissaries in Chabad house. It can illuminating the very special place of emissaries women in Chabad outreach. In the book prologue, Philip writes about the relationship between religion and society, regarding the religion as the handmaiden of the new sociology concept, as we use social terms in religion and Jewish studies. As Philip writes, religion continues to influence almost every aspect of human society, economic, political, social, and structural, and the challenge for those disciplines is to rediscover the place of religion in both empirical realities of 21st century. I based on this conviction that in order for women to advance in the modern world, we need to understand the deepest sources of gender rules in culture, and that requires an engagement with religion and with religion scholarship at the deepest level. More specifically, I would like to refer the gender social theory and the religion relationship as the scholar Orit Avishai analyzed it. In the first period of gender and religious scholars, they drew on feminist concepts such as women empowerment, emphasize gender differences, and celebrate women's standpoint and women's ways of knowing. Those scholars regard religion as an obstacle to feminist goals and has therefore approached it with ambivalence. In the next period of gender and religion research, discussed phenomena at the intersection of gender and religion. This was the outcome of a critique of Orientalism and secularism in this stage. In this stage, they positing gender and religion cases as sites to investigate core question in the sociology of gender and feminist theory. Understanding how social influence such as social institutions such as religion construct gender as a social category, and how individual responds and navigates those social institutes and context, and how gender is produced, reproduced, taught, negotiate, and transform. According to McGuire, gender profoundly affects people's religion is life, because gender differentiation permits so many aspects of life in most cultures. We realized the considerable complexity of all ways people, religion, and spirituality are linked with their gender experiences of self and other, the relationship with human and divine other, and the root sense of identity and community. So we ask, what are the Rebbe expectations from Jewish Hasidic women, and what the very special place he gave to the shlucha, to the emissary woman? As Philip wrote in Social Vision, the Rebbe called to us to use religion as a means of countering the dominant culture of society, and this is the way to bring therapeutic to the modern world. In the Rebbe world, primarily we must live the life of social beings with the responsibility and dedication of our best efforts for the clan, for the community. And only then we can afford to invest in our own individual aims and goals. The shlucha, the emissary women in Chabad, are the executive arm to the mystical and the social revision. They execute the Rebbe theory of reciprocity and social repair in the ideas that Philip wrote in the book. They support the social community, and they organize in an organization. They engage to social contribution for the good for the others. And for example, they're part of the duties, and they are visiting patients, they are maternity support, and all the outreach, they handling their outreach by spread all the mitzvot, all the rules. For example, they doing candlelight projects and separating challah ceremony, and etc., etc. As Rappaport Albert wrote, in the teaching of Menachem Mendel Schneerson, women, when invested for the first time with the sense of being full-flagged female Hasidim in their own rights. In this apocalyptic Mysticism, the Rebbe consistently framed the empowerment of women in the terms of Kabbalistic eschatology, anticipating the present, the invert. Gender hierarchy of Messianic future, which was, as he declared, just about unfold. In this context, he applied to women some of the classical Hasidic formulation of doctoring of the tzaddik, depicting them as a channel that mediates between heaven and earth. The Rebbe was a staunch believer in women learning. He saw the women as collaborators in the great drive to carry out the divine commands. The Rebbe wanted to strengthen the woman's connection to God and the community by instructing them to learn more about issues and ways of Hasidism, about the beyond what was necessary for the daily life. The Rebbe also harnessed the woman's mental and physical energies for outreach purpose. Women asked to complete men's service as proselytizing, becoming emissaries, shluchot in their own rights, rather than being wife of emissaries. Usually, Chabad houses are run by both spouses when, as I said, the role of the woman is alongside the role of the man in spreading Judaism. In the society of missionarity, as we talk about the spread of religion that Christianaries, most of the time he talks about it, the institution of mission was being a male institution, but relying on the ad being emissary by women as producing the most significant link between religion and local Kabbalah. And as soon women made contact according to the weather of the family, the whole family expressed in Christianity. So we will conclude by saying that the women in Chabad mission have a significant and important role in bringing about the redemption, and even according to the words of Shneur Zalman, the author of the Tanya and the founder of Chabad, he says that woman has superiority in life of the next world. In the future, the relationship man and woman will be reversed. In the future, the relationship between the man and woman will be changed. And in the days of Mashiach, it will have a superiority over the inferiority condition that we have today. Women are giving a sense of mission and doing, turning the Mashiach into a reality in which the spiritual and reality woman has to take her place next to the man, or even above him. That's all.
Thank you so much, Michal. Our next speaker is Bill Parsons, who's professor of religious studies at Rice University, and his remarks are entitled Psychoanalysis, Interdependence, and the Rebbe. Please take it away, Bill. Oh, you're still muted, Bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonah. I want to begin by thanking Phil, who's out there. It's good to see you again, Phil. And also Eli Rubin, and the many people who I can't see who know me. Thank you for tuning in. And of course, to my two panelists, especially Rachel, who I've known for 100 years. Okay. So, and some of my colleagues at Rice who are also tuning in. So you can tune out shortly. I'm not going to be saying anything new, just sort of rephrasing stuff. I've been working on a book on psychoanalytic theories of religion. So I thought it would be proper if I regurgitated some of that material. And my theme is, how can concepts taken from the psychoanalytic tradition inform not just the recognition of the interdependence of humans, but enhance its existential actualization. So not just talking about it, but being it. That's what we all want, right? Then we don't need all this talk stuff. We would be it. So this is interesting because Freud was not always friendly to religion, but some of his concepts have been used in dialogue with other religious traditions, as Rachel showed a little bit earlier with Judaism, to enhance people's capacity for interdependence. And it's also true of subsequent developments within psychoanalytic theory that have been much more receptive to religion and much more positive about the wisdom within religious traditions. So I can't do all of it. I'm going to use some concepts selectively and short, right? 12, 15 minutes, something like that. And what I'm going to give to you is in three parts. The first part is Freud's own experience with religion, and particularly inequality, racism, and tribalism, and how it was important in his emerging psychology of religion. That's the person aspect of my talk. The second is more sociological, and I think Phil will like this. This is basically the way in which the clinical social space is a kind of a praxis. What is the nature of that social space? I want to make a couple of observations on that. And then finally, that would be the praxis part. So person and then praxis. And then the third is application. How can we use some of the concepts to apply to this notion of interdependence? And I'll look specifically at Freud's views of the love command and how he was very critical of it, sort of the mendacity of the love command, what not to do, right? And then how subsequent psychoanalysts tried to re-engage that and, as it were, resurrect it. Okay, so if that's clear, hopefully it is. The first is Freud's biography. Now this is an industry. There's like a library of this stuff. So I just want to make a couple of points that will get us into this topic. Most people don't know that Freud actually was considering becoming a politician. Very early on in his life, when his parents moved from Moravia to Vienna because of the political liberal atmosphere, they'd go to parks and there would be sort of these strollers that would walk by and they would tell things to people about their future, and they would go up to the young Sigismund, that was his original name before he changed it to Sigmund, a little less Jewish. He wanted to assimilate into the Viennese culture. And they would say, oh, well, he's going to be a member of the cabinet. Because even as a Jew, you could do that in that politically liberal atmosphere. And everyone's, yeah, this is great. And when he went to the University of Vienna, he actually belonged to a lot of the political clubs. And his best friend was in charge of one of the political clubs. So this looked swimmingly well for him. He, during the course of his studies, obviously moved away from being a politician into the medical field. Well, one of the reasons for that is because in the 1880s, a guy named Karl Lueger was elected mayor of Vienna on an explicitly anti-Semitic platform with the backing of Rome, of Catholic Rome. And Freud just became scared. He could see the anti-Semitism just welling up in Vienna. And so he would write to his then fiancée about the anti-Semitic riots. His political club began to turn on him and he was booted from his political club. And he had a very interesting dream that he recounts in the interpretation of dreams. And dreams are like a window into how people are feeling at that time. It's a very famous dream. It's called The Uncle with the Yellow Beard. I'm not going to go through the dream, but the whole point of the dream, if you want to get to the actual thoughts behind it, was it dealt with the anti-Semitic atmosphere and his fears over whether he would eventually be able to be a professor and be tenured. There was something like 2 out of 51 Jewish scholars that were actually tenured. Is very difficult. And clearly Freud thought that there was anti-Semitism afoot. So this impacted him greatly. And there was the love command behind all of it. Love your neighbors yourself, unless you're a Jew, right? So it's like, that's so awful. And so this stuck in his craw, but he never sort of gave up that sort of social part of him, is the point. And it gave rise to a series of other dreams. He dreamed, they called the Rome dreams, where he would always try to get to Rome, but would never get there. And he started analyzing these dreams, and he came up with a bunch of associations that led to what had been called his Hannibal fantasy, where he would be like the Spanish general Hannibal, and he would go and he'd conquer the Romans and Catholicism. And this father was involved. It's a very complicated series of scholarly essays on this, but this is very much part of his motivation for writing about religion. So later on, he developed his clinical works, right? His case histories and his theories. But then there is applied works. These are the works that he applied to religion. And he wrote 4 books on religion and numerous essays. So he never really gave up this notion that somehow society had to be transformed. And people always miss that out. There's actually 2 parts to his psychology of religion. One is personal transformation, right? Where id was, there ego shall be. That was sort of a pithy psychoanalytic motto for personal transformation. But then there's also the part of his theory that wants to change social structures. He understood that social structures were, in his words, unpsychological, and they had to become more psychological. And a lot of his applied works were designed for that purpose. So one of his most famous applied works, Civilization and Its Discontents. So the German is Das Unbehagen in der Kultur. And Unbehagen is a funny word. It's been translated as discontents. It's a terrible translation. What he meant by that is that people don't like being in civilization because they're innately antisocial, they're hostile, they're aggressive. That was his starting point for critiquing Marx. Marx thought, well, you just change culture and divvy up the resources and everyone's going to be okay. And Freud said, no, that's not true, because people hate, they want to kill. This is intrinsic part of who we are. So part of it is that we don't like being in culture, but it's exacerbated by the fact that institutions themselves are unpsychological, and foremost among those, Freud thought, was religion. So he wanted to attack, as it were, religious commands, ideologies, and stuff, because he thought that they were all mendacious. And there's a developmental infrastructure to all commands, including the love command. I'm going to get to that momentarily. So to sum up, we have Freud. He's subjected to anti-Semitism, but he sees these commands like love your neighbor. But the Catholics who backed this anti-Semitic mayor, they didn't seem to love the Jews, so what the hell is going on, okay? This is ingrained in him existentially as a person. And he's going to use psychoanalysis to try to change not only individuals so they can see their own racism, but he's going to change social structures because they're too unpsychological, and they ferment this kind of racism, which is the diametric opposite of interdependence. Okay, so that's the person part. So what about the praxis part? So this gets into what a social space is. You have to go to anthropologists and sociologists. I'm sure Phil's gonna like this. Hopefully he'll like this, maybe not. I've had these discussions with Phil. But let's take Mary Douglas, just a very simple notion of what a house is. Like, you know what your spaces in your house are. There's the foyer, there's the living room, there's the dining room, there's the bathroom, and there's the bedroom. So usually you do things in the bathroom that you don't do in the kitchen. I'm going to assume this is the case. And also, there are things that you do in the kitchen that you don't do in the living room, right? Little Johnny can take the ice cream to watch the TV on the couch, but he starts spilling that ice cream, then uh-oh, you can only eat the ice cream in the kitchen. So all the rooms have their little rules. Similarly with the foyer, you come in with your dirty boots. You don't take the boots and then put them on the kitchen table, right? Because they're dirty on the kitchen table, but not so dirty in the foyer, because that's because dirt is context dependent, right? All these spaces have their kind of rules. So the university space has its own rules. At Rice, where I teach, it's secular, pluralistic, and critical. So we're not all a bunch of theologians and rabbis down at Rice, right? It is a critical space. I keep telling my students this when they want to proselytize. That's not what we're doing here. This is a critical, pluralistic space. Well, what about the clinical space? Well, this is a very interesting space, because think about the door of the clinical space when you walk in. That represents the cultural superego. What do I mean by that? I mean that which tells you what to repress, the do's and don'ts of society. That's what the cultural superego is. It's usually religious. We all have it ingrained from the time we're very young. But those doors represent that repressive barrier. Once you get into the clinical space, you're enjoined to just say whatever you want, right? I want to kill my professor, that Parsons. I want to kill him right now. I always tell my students this actually is a good pedagogical strategy. They love it because they secretly do want to kill you. This is what I've learned. So if you're in that social space, all of the unconscious can come out and you're kind of re-socialized in some sense. So this space, some people claim it's mind control. You're being brainwashed. You're being re-socialized in society. And there's some good critiques about that. There's a whole another series of essays saying, well, what's really happening is it's potentially a revolutionary space, right? Feminism, right? Race equality, sexual orientation. All of those things are allowed to come out in that space. People get re-socialized. And they start thinking, I shouldn't do what the cultural superego tells me to do. I should do other things. So interestingly enough, this social space has given rise to it's a cultural strand, so to speak, to some of the more revolutionary movements that we see in democracies. And psychoanalysis does fare well in democracies and not in totalitarian states. So they carry that out, and then there are books written and there are movies that are designed and TV shows, and suddenly we have all these different models for what we can be rather than the very limited ones in religion. So it can be very subversive. It can be very critical of religion. So hence Paul Ricoeur's famous phrase, the hermeneutics of suspicion. What is religion? Is it really about an ontos, or is it the projection of unconscious contents? For Freud, it is. So the movie metaphor really works here. The projector at the back of the screen is your mind, and what's on the screen is the movie of religion, but it's coming from your mind, not some God thing out there, because he was an atheist. Okay. So the social space is really a place for social change, social transformation. And Rachel earlier referred to Philip Reif's triumph of the therapeutic. And this is really essentially what Reif was arguing, that there has been a sea change in Western cultures, Western democratic cultures. It has become more therapeutic. And I think this is what Freud was after. He wanted to change the cultural superego from a more religious register to a therapeutic register with varying degrees of success. But it's a praxis, and that's why his theories are so powerful, is because they lead to existential transformation as well as social transformation. Okay? So in a very abbreviated way, that's the second part of what I want to say. This is the praxis part. Okay, so the third part, this is sort of application. And I just want to talk very briefly about the love command as an example of this. So Freud was naturally critical of the love command. He thought that, yeah, you're supposed to love your neighbor yourself, but it never works out that way. And he makes some very funny and wry comments. You just have to know Freud when you're reading him about the function that Jews have served through the centuries for basically, they're always the out group, right? Love your neighbor as yourself, as long as you're in that club, right? As long as you're a Christian. But if you're not, then, well, where's the hate going to go? Because we're not just creatures of love, we're creatures of hate. You can't just extinguish the hate. So if you love everyone in your in-group, well, the hate's got to go somewhere, and it's going to go to the out-group, and the Jews have performed that service throughout humanity. And Freud understood this. So the problem with the love command is it's unpsychological. That is to say, it does not take account of the actual mental constitution, the biological constitution of human beings. You have to, as it were, it wasn't against it, but you have to fiddle with it a bit. Otherwise, what you get are a lot of people that are apparently loving each other in their group, but then hating everybody else. And we can see this right today on the political scene, right? This gives rise to tribalism and then racism. These are all of a piece. And then eventually the doctrine of predestination, which is simply a doctrinal way of saying tribalism. We're the ones that get to go with God, and the rest of you get to go to some bad place, right? And this is in the halls of Congress from Michelle Bachmann. Remember her? Predestiner, big time. It influences policy, and it's also the same doctrine that ISIS has, right? If other people aren't going to be predestined for heaven, then they're not really people. You can butcher them or rape them or whatever you want. It's a very, very dangerous doctrine, but it's kind of a higher form of repression. It's tribalism writ large and into the cosmos. And Freud thought that that was just horrible. So his psychology was designed as a cautionary tale, as a deconstruction of what can go wrong. Okay, but what can go right? Well, you have to go a little bit further down the line, the psychoanalytic line, and this is going to seem a little strange, but the idea basically is that as you begin to engage in therapy, you begin to peel away the layers and you become understanding of your own discontent, so to speak, in your unconscious. You become more empathic towards yourself, and you become therefore more empathic towards other people. You don't project as much onto other people. You see that they're just like you in some kind of very fundamental way. So empathy becomes, as it were, it's an innate psychological characteristic, but it can be enhanced by the therapeutic process. And it can be enhanced so much that you can have moments of seeing this deep interdependence that we all have. And Heinz Kohut was an object relations theorist, and he knew this because what he'd find in his analytic sessions is that a lot of times people would be very relaxed, and he would have this kind of empathic resonance with them that border on basically telepathy, thought transference, where people would have the same thoughts sort of blurbing up. And I'm sure we've all had these experiences like at coffee shops, when you're with a friend and you're talking and there's a moment of silence, and then you both say the same thing at the same time, and then you just start laughing. I've had this experience with my own mother. It's a long time ago, but I remember driving with her once, and I was sort of in this very sort of relaxed state, and I had this thought, but I didn't utter it. I just watched it like a fish swimming by. And then it exited, and then my mother said that thought, and I was shocked. But that convinced me that there's this kind of very deep interdependence between people. And Kohut went so far as to say that this kind of deep interdependence, and by the way, he went back to Freud's papers on telepathy to authorize his thoughts on this, because Freud, that's been blackballed by the psychoanalytic establishment. But this sense of like really deep empathy, Freud thought really deep empathy, like between parents and children. There's this notion of like, you know when something's wrong, or even if your child is 300 miles away, you know something happened. And it really does border on this kind of telepathy. Well, Kohut took this and he said, it's not just that we have this deep interdependence, but especially with therapy, it's like you're taking on the suffering of another person. You know, the old notion that you're taking on another sense. This is vicarious suffering. That would be the theological rendering of this. But what Kohut had this experience with an obsessional neurotic where after the session was over, he went back to his car to go home, and he thought to himself, gee, did I close my office door? And he went back and he checked, oh yeah, I shut it, I locked it. And then he went back to his car and went, wait, did I really? Maybe I should relock. So he went back 3 times. And then suddenly he realized that all of his psychological structures had become obsessional because he had been dealing with this obsessional patient. This is what I mean by you're taking on the suffering of another person. This is the deep form of interdependence. The Indian psychoanalyst Sudhir Kakar thought very much the same thing and talks about this and relates it specifically to Hinduism. And this whole notion of the complete identification with the other, to the extent that your own psychological structures are altered in being the other person, literally. So Okay, so what's the point of this? The point of this is that through this process, you're moving away from just kind of a rote knowledge of, say, loving your neighbor, or say the Buddhist Indra's net, where we're all basically interdependent. And you're actualizing for yourself, and you're experiencing it for yourself. And the more we grow as a species towards that, the more things like tribalism and racism will disappear. That's the hope. Will it ever come to be? Don't know. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Wow, that was fascinating. Thank you so much for that. So we have just a few minutes left, about 5 minutes left. I want to leave some space for Michal and Rachel, if there are any responses or thoughts about other panelists, please feel free to jump in now. And yeah, as if there's anyone who wants to respond to anything anyone else said.
Sorry, Bill, you go first.
Oh, I have a question for Rachel.
Okay.
And I know Phil's going to love this.
Oh dear.
But you mentioned interworldly mysticism, and I'm just wondering how can you expand on that a little bit with therapy and spirituality and interworldly mysticism? This is a Weberian concept for those who are not familiar with Weber, but I know Phil uses this concept a lot in his book. So I'm just wondering if you could expand on that a bit.
Okay, so yeah, it's based on Weber's typology of different kind of mysticism, and Weber distinguished between two types of mysticism. One is otherworldly, in which we're looking for redemption after this life. In Judaism, we're looking for Geula ba'olam haba, we would say that, or we will be redeemed from the suffering of this life after we die and go on to heaven. And the other option is inner-worldly mysticism, which redemption is here. I mean, we're not looking outwards, we're looking inwards into this life. And we're looking at ways that which we can be redeemed here and now, and not looking for death to sort of free us from suffering. And in a sense, therapy is a secular form of inner-worldly mysticism, in that we seek to be redeemed in this world. We seek to better our life, to be redeemed from our suffering by going to either psychoanalysis or workshops, spiritual workshops, and look for this sort of redemptions and healing in our life. And this turn is not only for all the spiritual new agey forms, but we can find it in scholars said it can be found in many the classical traditional religions, in which I think it was Catherine Albanese who actually said that religion now, it's become religious redemption is healing. We all look to be healed here and now. We're not looking, I don't want to wait till I'm 120 and die and then only to be redeemed. I want to be healed now. I want to feel good about myself. I want to be happy. Happiness is a redemption. So I think that was what I was trying to play with when I said that.
Thanks. I want to bring the question over to Michal, and I wonder if you can speak a little bit to this conversation of like this worldly redemption with the role of Chabad emissaries in terms of finding value in the current here and now, rather than waiting for some redemption later. And very briefly, because we only have 2 minutes left, so I'm sorry to give you such a huge question, but yeah. And you're still muted, sorry. You're still muted. I just asked on you, you should be able to.
Yes.
There we go.
As I said, her part is she taking part of she has to be very activity, and she has a lot of things to do in this activity. And for example, the Rebbe said that her part in dealing her family, and the family is supposed to be a good that everybody should see her, how the way she takes her family and do so. So she helps and she does spread all the rules, and she contacts the community, and she does all these things. And the main interesting thing again, that in the future, she will bring the redemption. You know, as we know, as Miriam in the desert, she talked about the redemption of Israel. This is the way the woman should help in the redemption of all Israelis.
Thank you so much. We're just out of time. This was such a fascinating conversation. I was so lucky to be a part of it. I just want to thank our three panelists, Michal, Rachel, and Bill. Please join us again in 15 minutes. We can have a bathroom break or get a snack or whatever you need to do, and we'll have a reflection with the authors of Social Vision. So that's gonna be really great, and please join us then. So thank you so much to our panelists. We can stop going on live stream for the next 15 minutes, and yeah, please join us for our next session. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was fascinating. I was really happy to be a part of it. I'm going to now switch out the panelists, so I'm gonna unfortunately have to downgrade you three and upgrade the next three. So please continue on if you're able to, and listen to the next panels. And great to learn with you.
Okay.
This is going to take a second, so now it's kind of awkward. I don't know why it isn't. Made a whole thing about saying bye, and now we're not. Denise, I'm having a hard time. There we go. Okay, now it's working. Okay. There we go.